Pronominal suffixes on the imperfect. We've looked at pronominal suffixes on the perfect, and that was fairly involved. Now we'll turn to pronominal suffixes on the imperfect, which fortunately is not so involved. And we'll approach this the same way we did with the perfect. We'll have a verb and our pronominal suffix, and we'll look at three areas of morphology. We'll look at the pronominal suffix itself. We'll look at the ending of the verb. And what this will amount to is looking at the helping vowel, which will be based on sere. With the perfect, we saw a helping vowel based on the a vowels, kamets and patach. With the imperfect, it's based on sere, or e vowels, so tsere, segol, and shva. And then thirdly, we'll look at the internal vowel changes in the base form itself. So, pronominal suffixes, verb endings, internal vowel changes. And let's start with our pronominal suffix. Here are our lists, our patterns. With the perfect, we had three of them. We had one that you tacked on vowel endings, and another one on stressed consonantal endings, and a third one on just plain consonantal endings, endings that are consonants but are not stressed. So we had three. Now we have two. And the first one here is really just like the perfect, only it uses E-based helping vowels. So if I compare it with the perfect, here's our list that we had from the last module. So we have, well, let's go back here. We have who, and we have who, right? The difference is we have a who versus who. But aside from the helping vowel, it's basically the same. We have ha and ha. We have cha and ch, cha and ch. We have ni and ni. We have mem and nun, m and n, and m and n. We have chem, chem, and the feminine ones again are not attested in for either perfect or imperfect. And we have nu and nu. So the thing to remember here is that we have basically the same endings as the perfect, but we have a tsere-based helping vowel. So ehu, eha, echa, eich, eni, aim, ein, here there is none, chem, and enu. Okay, no big deal. You don't need to memorize this. In fact, there's nothing in this module on the imperfect that I think you need to memorize in terms of being able to reproduce. You've seen all this in one form or another before. Now here, what is this? These are the endings with what is called the energic nun. Now what happens is this. You can sometimes, if you have an imperfect and you have a pronominal suffix, you can sometimes get a nun that inserts itself in between these two. And it then assimilates to the next consonant, which means that it becomes like the next consonant. So you get this double consonant, which in Hebrew is expressed with a dagesh forte. And so you get this dagesh forte running all the way through here. So you have this dagesh forte there and there and there and there and there. And this energic nun is basically strengthens the ending. It adds more substance to it, right? Now, one thing to make sure you don't confuse this with, this is what they call the energic nun. There's something called the pedagogic nun. If you have a imperfect form with a vowel ending, you can sometimes get a final nun, and it'll be written like the final nun, right? Which is different than this. That's called the pedagogic nun. It comes at the end of imperfects that have vowel endings. It just sometimes shows up. That's different than the energic nun, which comes between the imperfect and the suffix and is assimilated into the suffix. So Ross has a little discussion about that, so just so you don't confuse them, we mention it here. But what we're talking about here is the energic nun. Now, this form here, this pattern, ends up being almost identical to what we saw already with memenu. With min, when you add pronominal suffixes on them, I don't remember what chapter that was, within the last few chapters anyway. Here in the dark letters here, I have memenu. Let's compare them. Memenu, enu. Same ending, right? Mimena, ena. Same ending. Mimecha, now this one's a bit different. Here we have echa. And notice here we have this odd looking form. We have a final cough. We have a dagesh in the final cough and the comets. So that's a little odd to have a final dagesh forte with the comets in there. But that's what it looks like. That dagesh there is your nun, your assimilated nun. Okay. Mimeni, any, and down here, mimenu, enu. So this list here is almost identical to what we have over here with mimenu. And there's some unattested forms as well. So these ones don't exist. So again, this is not something to memorize. We've seen these endings already. Just know that we have E-based, tsere-based helping vowel, and we've seen these ones with mimenu. Those are our two paradigms for the pronominal suffixes on the imperfect. Let's now look at the next step. Here's our perfect again, and here's our pronominal suffixes on the imperfect. This is the closest we get to a master chart that Ross gives us. He doesn't bother to give us all the forms like we did with the perfect because we don't need it. These ones are not so hard to recognize. So instead, he gives us the 3ms form, an example with that. An example with a 3ms form using the energic endings, energic nun endings, and 3mp form. So let's look at, we've already looked at the pronominal suffixes over here, like who. We've looked at the ending of the verb, which basically amounts to this helping vowel, tsere-based. Now let's look at the vowel changes in the base form itself. And they're not complicated. We basically have two of them. We have pretonic reduction. Normally, let me write down here, yif code. Yif code is our base form, right? 3ms imperfect base form. Holum here is the theme vowel that we normally have for dynamic verbs, right? Yif code. If we add a vocalic ending here, if you go back to your basic paradigm, you'll see if you add a vocalic ending, this will reduce. Holum disappears, you get a shava. Well, the same thing happens here. When we add the pronominal suffix, the theme vowel disappears and we get a shava. So instead of yif code dehu or something, we have yif kedehu. Okay? So we have pretonic reduction. Yif kedehu, yif kedeha. Okay, that's the first point. The second point is that when you add the 2ms suffix, and Ross talks about this, when you add the 2ms suffix, cha, this can reduce, the whole one can reduce to a kametatuf, which is the short o. So here we have yif kod cha. This is the short o, the kametatuf. We have that instead of having yif kidcha or something. Okay? So that's what can happen there. And also you'll notice down here that we have the kametatuf as well for these second person plural forms. Yif kod chem, yif kod chen. I think this is a mistake. Either that, let me check that. Yif kod chen. Yeah, this should be a final nun. However, it's interesting. Oops. He has this in his list, Ross does, but if you go back here, he says it's unattested. So my guess is it doesn't exist. Not important in any case. Yif kedenu. So here we're back to the reduction to a shava, pretonic reduction. So pretonic reduction, except sometimes you get, instead of reduction to a shava, you get reduction to a kametatuf. And over here, with energic nun, you also get reduction to the kamets, or to the shava. So yif kedenu, yif kedena, yif kedeni. And over here in the plurals, yif keduhu. Same thing, pretonic reduction, yif keduha. And it looks like in this form we don't have any kametatuf. They're all gone to pretonic reduction. So, it's not going to be something that's hard to recognize. You recognize the imperfect by its prefix anyway. Just remember that you do have pretonic reduction, so you won't see the theme vowel. You won't see the whole. Now, one last point. What happens with the statives or the gutturals? Remember, with the statives or gutturals, we have a patach here rather than a holum. Well, Ross gives us a single example just to point this out. What happens is, see, it would be this, right? Yish Instead of O, we would have a patak there. Yishma. What happens is this lengthens to a full kametz, full A. So instead of yifkedeni, we have yishma'eni. Okay? But again, this is not going to throw you. In fact, if you're reading quickly, you probably won't even notice. So the imperfect is not hard to recognize. We've seen the endings already on the perfect. The key thing is the tsere helping vowel, the tsere or tsere-like, the E-based helping vowel, and recognizing that we have this energic nun form, which is much like memenu. We have pretonic reduction, but I don't think that's really a big deal, because you'll recognize it anyway. Okay, next module, we'll do the imperative. And in this module, there really are no paradigms you have to memorize. Just know these basic points, especially the tsere helping vowel. That'll be important.